Like we have a good number of attendees lined up. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Cathy Chase, President of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety.
Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm Cathy Chase, President of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. We're a unique alliance of consumer, medical, public health, law enforcement, and safety groups, and insurance companies and agents working together to make America's roads safer. As today's moderator, I'd like to just mention a few housekeeping items before I kick things off. First, American Sign Language interpretation is being provided by Interpret This. Second, we have an outstanding lineup of speakers representing a variety of organizations and perspectives. To make certain they all get a chance to speak, we will hold your questions until the end, and we aim to keep today's event within an hour time period. Third, this event is being recorded, will be posted on saferoads.org for a limited time, and subsequently can be made available upon request. Additionally, the autonomous vehicle tenets, a summary of the tenets, a list of organizations that support them, and a contact list of the speakers will be posted on our website, saferoads.org, in case you have questions about issues not covered today, or any follow-up questions we don't have time to respond to. Lastly, the topics covered in the autonomous vehicle tenets and discussed today do not represent all the views held by participating organizations on autonomous vehicles, which I will refer to as AVs for the rest of my remarks. Let me begin by saying that without question, this is a transformative time in road transportation safety. Life-saving technologies are evolving and entering the marketplace at a critical time. In 2019, more than 36,000 people were killed and millions more were injured on our roadways. Annually, crashes impose a financial toll of over $800 billion in total cost to society and $242 billion in direct economic costs. This is equivalent to a crash tax of $784 on every American every year. The good news is that proven solutions are readily available now. Research performed by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has demonstrated that systems like automatic emergency braking, lane departure warning, and blind spot detection, among others, prevent and reduce the severity of crashes. The problem is that these safety systems are often sold as part of an additional expensive trim package, along with other non-safety features, or included as standard equipment only in high-end luxury vehicles. Additionally, there are no minimum performance standards to guarantee these systems are working as expected and as needed. To date, the U.S. Department of Transportation has failed to act. Instead, it has mistakenly relied on weak and ineffective voluntary industry agreements to equip vehicles with essential safety technology. This departmental inertia has slowed progress when urgent leadership and innovation are needed. History has demonstrated that when the department issues safety regulations that require technology as standard equipment on all new cars, like rear-view cameras, the benefits are immediate, the price drops, and so do deaths and injuries. Instead of advancing proven safety technology, a fervor has been whipped up about AVs. Unsupported claims have added fuel to this fire, including statements that the US is behind other countries in AV development and that tens of thousands of exemptions to existing safety requirements are needed to be competitive. Neither claim is true. Nonetheless, there have been signals that next year, Congress will once again try to advance an AV bill. In preparation, we've been reaching out and working with numerous stakeholders to develop the document we are releasing today, the AV Tenets. These are positions we all share on essential provisions in any future legislation addressing the development and deployment of AVs. I'd like to note that this is a living document as more and more groups become involved and offer recommendations. The tenets are divided into four main categories of prioritizing safety of all road users, guaranteeing accessibility for all, preserving consumer and worker rights, and ensuring local control and sustainable transportation. Within the first category of prioritizing safety, We enumerate safety rulemakings to develop baselines, not ceilings, for different components of AVs. We also call for critical safety and performance data to be collected and publicly available to accurately assess the performance, as well as identify problems with AVs on our neighborhood streets and roads. Not only are these concepts common sense, they are also strongly supported by the public. A survey commissioned by advocates earlier this year found that nearly 70% of respondents said they would feel more comfortable about AVs if they knew manufacturers had to meet minimum performance standards before selling them to the public. In conclusion, we look forward to working with Congress to develop and pass legislation that seriously addresses highway fatalities by advancing proven technologies. We urge the U.S. Department of Transportation and Congress to use these AV tenets as their GPS to guarantee public safety for the continuing development and future deployment of AVs. Before I introduce our terrific panel, I'd like to thank the more than 55 organizations that support the AV tenets, and this list continues to grow, the numerous experts who offered their advice and recommendations, and the incomparable staff of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. We will hear first from William Wallace, Manager of Safety Policy at Consumer Reports. Then, addressing the historically overlooked issues of accessibility and equity, will be Carol Tyson, Government Affairs Liaison for the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, and Dara Baldwin, Director of National Policy at the Center for Disability Rights. They will be followed by Sam Loesche, Legislative Representative with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and Jack Gillis, Executive Director of the Consumer Federation of America, to talk about consumer and workforce rights with regards to AVs. Next, looking at the issues of sustainability, including congestion and climate impact, will be Scott Goldstein, Policy Director at Transportation for America. Then to discuss making AVs safe for all road users will be Dr. Stephen Hargarten of the Medical College of Wisconsin, where he serves as Professor of Emergency Medicine at the Comprehensive Injury Center and Associate Dean at the Office of Global Health, and Ken McLeod, Policy Director at the League of American Bicyclists. Addressing the perspectives of localities who are concerned about how AVs will change neighborhoods and roadways will be Marco Connor Diacqua, Deputy Director of Transportation Alternatives. Thank you again for joining us, and I'd now like to turn this over to Will Wallace.
Thank you very much, Cathy. I'm here on behalf of Consumer Reports, the independent nonprofit member organization that works to create a fair and just marketplace for all. A major part of that work is to ensure that innovation and safety go hand in hand for all products, including cars, and that our laws reflect that imperative. Automated vehicles offer enormous potential to improve safety and mobility by substantially reducing the road crashes attributable to driver error. But to reach that full potential, rigorous and timely performance requirements will be essential. Currently, the real safety benefits AVs will deliver for consumers are largely unknown. These systems generally are not yet commercially available, and public trust in AVs is low, with Americans somewhat optimistic about the future while wary of the technology today. In addition, there have been fatal crashes involving driving automation systems, with the NTSB publishing detailed crash investigation reports that found insufficient safety protocols in place. Federal legislation so far has been inadequate, and it needs to be better. Previous legislation that was considered would have expedited the deployment of AVs on US roads for commercial use without requiring completion of any mandatory standards or performance requirements regulating the safety of these vehicles. The legislation was the target of significant criticism as a result, including by CR, and the bills were not approved. We urge Congress and all policymakers to take a different tack. We need federal policymakers to put safety first. And that's what the tenets being released today are all about. Today, we have a broad coalition saying safety, people must come first. That means, as you'll see in these tenets, that means that when companies are testing or deploying their automated vehicles, they should be required to submit rigorous data to NHTSA that allows the agency and the public to truly evaluate whether these systems are safe and whether they will live up to the promised safety benefits that, that have been claimed. These tenets also reflect that testing itself of automated vehicles must have rigorous oversight attached to it. Right now, testing varies greatly depending on the state, and in some places, there's hardly anything in place to make sure that the testing is being done safely. Automated vehicles have enormous potential, and so in order to demonstrate that safety potential, we urge there to be some sort of national framework where there are mandatory standards in place for testing, ones that escalate and that require various levels of proof that escalate higher and higher in order for developers of automated vehicles to broaden their testing. And then finally, there have to be strong cybersecurity protections, because the weakest link in the chain could cause the whole system to fall. And so cybersecurity regulations must be an immediate and urgent priority. At Consumer Reports, we're fighting for safety, and we stand side by side with all of the incredible advocates and organizations on the call today in urging Congress and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to take a new approach and to immediately focus on the safety of automated vehicles to make sure that they can be rolled out in the future and meet the great potential that they pose.
Thanks, Will. We'll now turn to Carol.
Good afternoon. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you all today. The AV advocacy of the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, known as DREDF, is rooted in our belief that access to safe, affordable, reliable transportation is a civil right. AVs have the potential to dramatically improve mobility, vehicle and road safety for the nearly 1 in 5 people in the US with a disability. However, the promise and safety of AVs will only be realized if the vehicles and the surrounding infrastructure are fully accessible and the safety elements consider the needs of all people with disabilities. We know that safe and accessible AVs will be needed and even required when used by publicly funded agencies, and retrofitting will be more expensive for providers in the long run. Yet, news accounts of AV testing and deployment timelines often fail to mention accessibility. Proposed legislation has failed to mandate accessibility and would not increase mobility for many people with disabilities. Mandated standards and testing requirements must ensure the ability of all passengers, including those with physical, sensory, and cognitive disabilities, to locate, enter, and exit the vehicle, and to communicate with the vehicle in routine and emergency situations. Standards must also ensure the safety of wheelchair users who remain in their wheelchairs and all pedestrians and mobility device users outside the vehicle. Safety evaluation reports must include the accessibility features of the vehicle and whether people with disabilities were consulted as part of the design and testing. Finally, resources must be available for NHTSA and the Access Board to continue research and provide technical assistance to stakeholders to ensure fully accessible and safe service in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. DREDF views this moment as an opportunity to reimagine mobility in line with principles of equity, sustainability, community engagement, and inclusion. We call on Congress to uphold the promise of AVs to transform the transportation system for the better and ensure access to mobility and safety for all. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. We'll now turn to Dara.
Peace and blessings, everyone. This is Dara Baldwin from the Center for Disability Rights. I want to thank everyone who's on this call today. And the Center for Disability Rights supports the tenets that are being put forth today completely. We also employ everyone to include equity in everything that they do. And as my colleagues have just said, Will and Carol and others will discuss, equity is about fair and impartial and making sure that all voices and all people are at the table when these conversations are had. As Will explained, in the past, that was not done, and we are calling on Congress and the administrations to make sure they include all of those voices so that when you're making these decisions about the design, the testing, and the implementation of AV, that it includes the definition of safety for all of those communities. As we have seen in this horrific year of 2020, for Black, Indigenous people of color, the word safety means something different for our community. It does not mean the same for other communities. And when we are creating legislation and policy, we must include equity that includes all of those people's mindsets and the things that they need to make sure their communities are safe. We look forward to working with Congress and with the U.S. Department of Transportation on anything moving forward with autonomous vehicles that includes equity and includes Black, Indigenous people of color having some kind of voice and some kind of leadership in that work. And I thank you to my partners who have allowed us to be a part of these tenets, and we look forward to seeing that work move forward.
Thanks so much, Dara. We'll now go to Sam.
Thanks, Cathy. So I'm Sam Loesche with the International Brotherhood Teamsters. Before we launch into it, just want to highlight a ally and brother of ours in labor who passed away yesterday. Larry Wallace is president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. He has been a champion and ally of working people on these kind of issues, and he'll be missed dearly. With that, I want to speak to things that he and the rest of the folks in organized labor and people who just work for working people have been saying for a long time, that this technology needs to be done for people and with people and not to people. Nothing kind of encapsulates that more than understanding that workers need to have a seat at the table as legislation is developed, as regulations are developed, as policy in general is developed, as these tenets really represent on a federal and national level, but as we've been also calling for on a state and local level as well. Workers, whether they are going to be at risk of losing their job or having their wages degraded, are going to be sharing the road with these vehicles for a long time. Safety is paramount for us and for them. They need to know that in spite of the promises made by developers and companies who are putting these vehicles on the road, that they are going to be able to take them at their word, and that the training and hard work that they have taken to make sure that they are safe operators of vehicles is not going to be jeopardized by an autonomous vehicle driving next to them, the capabilities of which they may not be aware of, may not know about, and may end up failing them and other road users. The other core issue here is jobs. The COVID life that we've all experienced in 2020 has only exacerbated a shift that we've all seen in general in the logistics and transportation industry, which has been a move to smaller and smaller vehicles doing the work that bigger and more regulated vehicles have done in the past. That leaves a potentially enormous loophole that could really jeopardize tens of thousands of hardworking Americans' jobs that are often middle-class jobs or a pathway to the middle class for a lot of Americans. This, along with all the other issues that people are talking about here, can't be forgotten. That needs to be first and foremost and at the forefront of everyone's minds. And any package that does not include any sort of rectification of that, that does not address those sorts of issues, first and foremost, will be dead upon arrival for organized labor. So with that, just really applaud you for putting these out, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sam. We'll now turn to Jack Gillis.
Thank you, Cathy, very much. I'm Jack Gillis, Executive Director of the Consumer Federation of America. CFA is made up of over 250 national, state, and local consumer-focused organizations. One of the most powerful agents for change and consumer protection is publicly available comparative information. Because of the enormous complexity of autonomous vehicles and the corresponding consumer concerns about their deployment, easy to understand, readily accessible, and comparative consumer information about AVs and safety feature performance must be a top priority of NHTSA. Making this information available is the only way to enable consumers to make informed purchase decisions and it'll put enormous market pressure on manufacturers to improve safety feature performance. The publishing of the NHTSA crash test provides powerful evidence of how market presence of comparative information dramatically improves safety performance. Because AVs will be collecting enormous amounts of personal data, the need to protect consumer privacy is critical. There must be full transparency about the collection of personally identifiable information, and it only can be collected on an opt-in basis with consumers in complete control of their information. In addition, the transmission of vehicle information must be held to the highest possible cybersecurity measures. Non-personal information about vehicle safety performance must be made available to NHTSA and to the public for research purposes. And the radio spectrum needed for the operation of AVs must be strictly limited to non-commercial use. To ensure that employees and contractors are free to disclose potential safety defects to NHTSA, the whistleblower protections afforded in the MAP 21 and the FAST Act must be included in any AV bill. It is also critical that consumers' right to seek accountability for AV-related injuries be absolutely preserved. Finally, the only way to ensure the safe introduction of AVs is to provide NHTSA with desperately needed additional talent and funding. Not to provide this critically important agency with needed resources is simply regulatory malfeasance. A robust NHTSA is not only critical to the public health of America, but will provide the manufacturers with guidelines that will ensure the success of their autonomous vehicles. We appreciate the advocates for highway and auto safety for putting together this extraordinarily diverse group of organizations who together are fighting to ensure the full potential of autonomous vehicles. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jack. We'll now turn to Scott.
Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Goldstein. I'm the Policy Director for Transportation for America. We're an alliance of elected business and civic leaders that supports moving people safely and affordably to jobs and services by multiple means of travel with minimal impact to communities and the environment. And we strongly support the goals of the AV Tenets, including minimum performance standards, safety and performance data sharing, and the preservation of local authority, and so many of the other issues that have already been discussed. But I'm here to talk about sustainability, including congestion and climate change. And it's critical and it's clear that land use and the built environment are at the core of any functioning transportation system and any effective response to the climate crisis. Transportation is now the largest source of US greenhouse gas emissions, and the majority of these emissions come from driving. At the same time, congestion is increasing as a result of communities where the destinations are spread out and is only possible to safely and conveniently travel by car. To address these issues and many others, it is critical that we make it safe, convenient, and affordable for people to reach daily needs while driving less. If roads are safe and if destinations are located relatively close together, it is possible for people to bike, to walk, and to ride transit to reach the things they need. This reduces emissions and congestion in the process. And we're here to talk about this because automated vehicles have the potential to worsen or to help solve these issues. And with thoughtful policy, automated vehicles can be incorporated into local communities and serve as an important connection. They can bridge the gaps in public transit and walking and cycling infrastructure. And they can help local communities efficiently manage valuable curb space. Alternatively, automated vehicles can contribute to increasing our emissions and worsening congestion by incentivizing sprawling development, further cementing driving as Americans' only transportation option. We need to ensure that AVs do not incentivize spread out land use patterns to support long trips in AVs and therefore the development of more communities where it is unsafe or inconvenient to take transit, walk, or bike. To leverage the potential of this technology and to enact smart local policy, local communities need to be empowered with information to understand the implications for AVs on land use and congestion and other impacts on their communities. So we agree with the tenets where we discuss a comprehensive federal effort that is necessary to study and inform policymakers and the public about how these vehicles will impact our existing transportation systems and ensure effective mitigation of any issues that are identified. So I want to thank all the speakers, particularly advocates for highway and auto safety, for inviting us to be here today. And now I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Scott. We'll now turn it to Steve.
Thanks, Cathy. I'm Dr. Steve Hargarten, Professor of Emergency Medicine and the founding director of the Comprehensive Injury Center at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I also serve as consumer co-chair on the Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety Board of Directors. Emergency medicine doctors and nurses are on the front lines of caring for critically injured patients from motor vehicle crashes. These crashes are violent, unforgiving, and often tragically fatal. It is this reason that motivates us to actively support proven solutions and countermeasures to curb this solvable public health burden. Many have touted autonomous vehicles as a potential solution. I share this hope. However, if AVs are left unfettered, unchecked, and unregulated, this so-called cure could result in even more preventable crashes, injuries, and fatalities. This threat is especially concerning when it comes to vulnerable road users such as pedestrians and bicyclists who lack the protections afforded by a 4,000-pound car. I think it's worth noting that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have identified motor vehicle injuries as a winnable battle, in part through the use of technology. Requiring crash avoidance technology, also known as advanced driver assistance systems, in every vehicle is a step that our nation's leaders could take right now. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has found that vehicles equipped with this technology experience significantly fewer crashes than those without. This includes 56% fewer front to rear crashes involving injuries in cars equipped with forward collision warning plus auto brake, and nearly 80% fewer crashes in vehicles with rear automatic emergency braking when combined with rear view mirror and parking sensors. Clearly, lives can be saved, while at the same time, the public is given a chance to see that the technology, when used and regulated properly, can improve safety. In conclusion, I would be remiss not to talk about how this year has presented new and unprecedented challenges to first responders and healthcare providers. Their selfless dedication to others in the face of a deadly pandemic has been nothing short of remarkable and heroic. As healthcare workers everywhere continue to provide this critical service, our hard work to control the epidemic of motor vehicle crashes must also continue. Our efforts today and the coming months to advance these AV tenets is key to that goal. Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much. And thank you for recognizing the first responders who have been helping us throughout this difficult year. I'd now like to turn to Ken.
Hi, Cathy. Thank you. Most people have experienced bad driving while biking, someone who is distracted, who is aggressive, who passes too closely, or honks impatiently. Automated vehicles provide an incredible opportunity to improve traffic safety and to improve the ease with which people can bike, walk, and exist outside of their vehicles. Many people that I've met with and spoke to in the bike community, whether they're advocates, club riders, or people who simply want to feel safe when they're riding with their children or their family, have expressed excitement about automated vehicles behaving better and being safer than human drivers. When we get past that initial excitement, too often we see that there is a hands-off approach by regulators and lawmakers that fails to deliver on that promise of automated vehicles. We find that technologies like automated emergency braking are tested for the safety of people biking and walking in other countries, but not in the United States. We find that a lack of oversight creates dangerous conditions for vulnerable people who are treated as edge cases rather than as everyday people who must be made safe. The League of American Bicyclists is excited to support the automated vehicle tenets today because they recognize that the opportunity of automated vehicles and show that we can guarantee public safety moving forward. The United States needs to be proactive and set high safety standards to build trust in automated vehicles and deliver on their opportunity. Actions like a vision test for automated vehicles so that the public knows that they can properly detect and respond to all types of vehicles, people, and objects in diverse road and weather conditions will build trust, save lives, and show that leadership in traffic safety means prioritizing the most vulnerable. Leadership in automated vehicles alone will not solve our nation's traffic safety woes. We need safer bike infrastructure, we need safer car and truck designs, and we need slower urban speed limits. But we can't move towards zero traffic deaths or say that we embrace a safe systems approach without holding new technology to those same goals. We can't wait and see on the safety of automated vehicles. We can't let industry move fast and break things when those things are people's lives. We can't afford to look back in a decade or two and find that automated vehicles fail to see people biking, strollers, people in dark clothing, or people with dark skin. With the tenets released today, we hope that lawmakers in the United States Department of Transportation see the opportunity of automated vehicles and recognize that delivering on that opportunity requires action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. And last but certainly not least is Marco. Thanks, Marco.
Thank you very much. So I am with Transportation Alternatives, and we are a New York City-based nonprofit advocacy organization. Organizing is at the core of our work, including bringing Vision Zero to the US and reducing cars for people walking, biking, and public transit is at the core of our work. I'm going to speak briefly to perspectives from the urban environment, what AVs can mean for our safety and our use of space and how it might affect public transportation as well. So our streets today, it's clear, they can be used far safer, more equitably and efficiently than they are today. Buses and micromobility, like biking, are always going to be more space efficient and safer than the car, whether it's an automated vehicle or if it's one of those dumb cars of today that can't even think on its own. So we have an epidemic of traffic violence in our country, and we have to recognize the utter destruction that our investment in our car culture has caused. We also have to make sure that the AV ultimately does not simply replace every car currently used. Otherwise, we'll fail to reap all the benefits that AVs can bring. So in most of the US, we tend to rely on the private car because that's what we have invested in. It's what we have designed most of our transportation infrastructure for. We invest in roads, highways, automobile production, and cheap gas. That's what our system is designed for, and that's what we get. But then there are, of course, also places where parts of our system in some cities also has been designed so you don't need a car. So public transit is is great for public safety. Every person commuting on the on subways and in bus is essentially one car or car trip less, and it means that one less car that would be more likely to take a life or injure another human being. And as we look towards AV adoption, we don't have to make it a one-on-one replacement for the private car. Rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft, as well as other vehicle fleet owners, are likely going to be among the first to adopt AVs. Lower costs for rideshares may incentivize them to flood cities with their AVs to increase service availability and response time to customers, which could create an explosion in the number of vehicles along with trawling for passengers. To illustrate just how AVs will never be able to replace public transit, in New York City, we at one point needed to make significant repairs to a subway tunnel following Hurricane Sandy in 2012 that at that point would have meant the closure of a subway line. And that subway line brought 200,000 people every day between two boroughs. That is the population of Pittsburgh. We calculated that to move that number of people by car, it would require 56 traffic lanes across the middle of Manhattan. So it's important that that we have regulations that also limit the potential flooding on our streets of AVs, especially for fleets. So lastly, I just want to speak to how this can affect how AVs and potential risk of flooding streets with more vehicles can result in worsening interactions in communities. There's research that has shown that that more traffic in neighborhoods leads to less social interaction, less interaction with your neighbors, and of course also more driving, more vehicles means more dangerous roads and a host of other ills. So in addition to federal AV safety standards that create a baseline for localities as we adopt highly autonomous vehicles, if we simply replace our current private cars with AVs, we miss out on opportunities to create streets and roads designed to prevent the loss of life and streets that are more family friendly. and foster social interaction instead of creating barriers to it. So we want our streets to become more, not less livable. And these are the things that we need to prioritize. And if we adopt and regulate AVs wisely, we can make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marco. And again, I just wanted to thank all of the experts on today's panel. As I'm sure the attendees have noticed, we represent a wide breadth of different perspectives and backgrounds. And we've spent a lot of time trying to develop these AV tenets. And again, we are continuing outreach. So anyone who is watching this event, we encourage you to reach out to us. My email address is cchase@saferoads.org. And all of the other attendees' contact information will be posted on our website, which is saferoads.org. I also wanted to just take a quick note that to recognize that it's actually the 55th anniversary of Ralph Nader's infamous publication on Safe at Any Speed. So maybe it's particularly fitting that we're addressing these issues today. And while we're talking about the future of surface transportation, I do think that today's remarks are captured well by a quote by Benjamin Franklin: "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." We all see the promise and possibilities of AVs in the long term, but to ensure success, the essential safeguards we outlined today all need to be put into place. I will now open up the conversation to questions for all of the attendees. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom to post your questions. Please be sure to include your name and affiliation. And again, as I stated at the beginning, we'll try to get to as many as we can. And if we can't, please feel free to follow up with any of us. If any of the panelists have turned off your videos, please turn them back on so that we can easily spotlight to you if you would like to answer any of the questions. And now I will turn to the Q&A. The first question is from Audrey LaForest, and I apologize if I mispronounced your last name. Audrey is a reporter with Automotive News. How is the coalition working to get automakers and tech companies that are manufacturing AVs and or AV technology on board with these tenets? Well, Audrey, thank you for that question. We're hoping actually that today might kick off that dialogue. We're having this event in November. And with the thought of there's plenty of time between now and the next Congress to try to come to some agreement on some of these provisions. I would have to say that historically or traditionally, the auto manufacturers come at it from a different perspective than at least advocates for highway and auto safety, wherein we see a great need for minimum performance standards and regulations, whereas, and not to speak for them, but traditionally they see a more hands-off or laissez-faire approach. So I'm hopeful we are able to create this wonderful diverse coalition, and we have a large umbrella to bring in any organizations that are interested in joining with us. So we're hoping that this kickoff event continues that growth. And if any of the other panelists would like to join in answering that question, I'd welcome you to do so.
This is Dara Baldwin with the Center for Disability Rights. I agree with everything that Cathy said, but also want you to know that we, as the disability community, have always had conversations with auto vehicle manufacturers, right? Of course, around accessibility. And of course, when autonomous vehicles started coming into the conversation, we continued those conversations. And as Cathy has said, they've taken a laissez-faire approach, but we continue our conversations with them and trying to push them to make sure they understand that having accessible cars and doing this work includes autonomous vehicles being safe.
Would any of the other panelists like to comment on that question? Okay, I'll go to the next question. It is from Charlotte with Senator Jim Inhofe's office. Has there been any discussion around where liability should be placed should an AV be involved in an accident? Thanks. Charlotte, thanks for your question. This is not an issue that advocates actually takes a position on, but I would be more than glad to open it up to anyone on this panel to address it. And if not, we would be glad to try to get an answer from you from some of the experts that I mentioned earlier, with whom we collaborated in developing the AV tenets. So would any of the panelists like to address that question?
Yes,
Okay.
Cathy, this is Jack Gillis at the Consumer Federation of America. Generally speaking, we do not want to see a situation where AV manufacturers or the auto manufacturers are absolved of liability. The liability issue is critical to consumers being able to seek recourse should there be a problem with that particular vehicle. And as with virtually every other single product, the manufacturer of the product needs to absorb the liability for that product. If they don't have to absorb the liability, therein lies a dramatic reduction in the pressure that the public can put on them to make sure that all their T's are crossed and their I's are dotted in terms of building a product that is going to be out there in the marketplace in one of the most important public health arenas in America.
Hey, Cathy, if I could too, totally agree with Jack. The only thing I would add too is, especially in the commercial space or in the, say privatized transit or contracted transit space, making sure that not only the manufacturer, but whoever's responsible for operating the vehicle, in that kind of space, in case they take it out of the manufacturer's, ODD recommendations or, in any other way kind of changes the functionality of the vehicle, make sure that all players who are responsible for the actions of the vehicle are held to account, exactly like Jack said.
Would any of the other, thank you, Jack and Sam, for jumping in and answering that. Would any other panelists have an opinion on that question? Okay, I'm going to go on to the next one. This is from Chris Teal with Smart Cities Drive. I think, well, it says Smart Cities Dive, but I'm wondering if that's a typo, but maybe not. As more states and cities have passed their own AV legislation in recent years, given the lack of federal action, how do you anticipate those existing laws, for example, Utah, Arizona, and others, interacting with anything new coming out of Congress? That's a good question, Chris. I'll take a first stab at it, but then I think maybe Marco or Dara or others might have an opinion on this. In terms of the AV tenets, these are taken from the federal perspective and your traditional federal jurisdiction on covering the vehicles and the roads themselves, wherein we strongly support the traditional position of localities and states retaining what they have control over. So we see them as two separate documents or laws, wherein the federal will stick in their lane and the state will stick in their lane. And that's the approach that we took on this document. But I'll then ask if anyone else on the panel would like to jump in and answer that question as well.
This is Scott, Transportation for America. I can't comment on the specific laws that that Chris mentions in his question, but just want to agree with what Cathy said. We were very concerned about efforts to preempt traditional local authority through federal legislation, and support the language and the tenets that underlines that there is a traditional divide between the federal authority and the state authority and the local authority. And we want to maintain that traditional authority where local communities can regulate speeding and other safety issues as they traditionally do today.
Yeah, I want to join that, Cathy and Scott, that we need to ensure that when it comes to safety, that the federal regulations are a baseline, a floor, and ensure that it does not morph into complete federal preemption of local laws meant to protect all road users.
Yeah, and this is Dara Baldwin again, Center for Disability Rights. I agree with what was said, but also Chris in the question asked, how are we going to do that? And I think that goes to what we all discussed in the presentations. We expect the communities to be asked and listened to. So it is imperative that, right, you who asked the question, Chris, and all of the people out there who work with communities, that they are in contact with their federal legislators and letting them know that we have these concerns and that we already have these laws. And that is where we're talking about making sure that all people are involved in this process. So I know that's how we do it. We work from the streets to the suites.
Thanks, Dara. Does anyone else want to comment on that issue? Or if not, I can go to the next. Okay, I'll go to the next one. This is from Fred Perkins. I'm not sure where Fred is from. He hasn't identified himself. Maybe he could, Fred, if you're still on, if you could add where you're joining us from. What is the best way to administer the proposed vision test? State development, question mark, model legislation by federal government, question mark, test by NHTSA, question mark. I'll turn, Dara, I see you wanted to, did you want to say something? Oh, okay. Oh, okay, Fred is with the Center for Auto Safety. Thanks, Fred, for that clarification. I'll talk generally about the vision test, and I would venture to guess, not to put him on the spot, that Ken might want to say something about this as well, because I know this is an issue they feel that the League of American Bicyclists feels particularly passionate about. The way that we have envisioned the vision test is right now, when a person goes to get to their driver's test, they have to take a vision test. Well, the vehicle itself will be taking over the capability, at least theoretically or as promised, to both see and respond to the road environment. So absent a minimum performance standard, you're going to have vehicles on the roads that may respond differently. They may see certain angles or different perspectives differently. And we want to make sure that there's a uniformity out there. And without laying, again, a basement, not a ceiling, for what these cars can do, we have great concerns that there will be, I would venture to guess, some AV manufacturers that will have excellent systems, but our concern is that there might be some that don't. And that also leads to a lack of security with consumers. As I mentioned, we commissioned a public opinion poll early in the year, and there's still a great amount of trepidation about what's going to happen with autonomous vehicles. So we need these assurances in the forms of minimum performance standards and regulations to say the car will do at least what it is expected to do. So yes, we are asking that NHTSA conduct a rulemaking to issue these minimum performance standards. I would wonder if Carol might also want to join in. I'll turn to Ken first, and then of course anyone on the panel is welcome to join in. Ken, you want to answer that?
Thank you, Cathy. I'm not a scientist at these things, but I always think of the testing that is currently done for automated emergency braking for pedestrian and bicyclist safety in the European Union through Euro NCAP. They are testing to see if those systems can recognize and respond to a person biking and walking. They are publicizing that information. They are giving that data to the public. In the US, we have had great work done by the Institute for Highway Safety and Consumer Reports to do some of that testing. But really we need NHTSA to step up and start doing that testing of these automated emergency braking systems and the other advanced driver assistance systems that kind of lay that groundwork that we're going to see in autonomous vehicles. The exact form of those testing parameters, I'm not going to go into that on this call, but we can at least start doing the testing that other places are doing now and building that expertise so that we can get really great testing that ensures that everyone's safe moving forward.
And hi, this is Carol, because Cathy called me out. I'll go ahead and share that at the beginning of the year, NHTSA announced that it was starting a research project on vehicles being able to see vulnerable road users and people with disabilities. I have no idea where that research has gone, given the year that we are all living through. They also, NHTSA was asked to work with the US Access Board to think about standards for vehicles and safety for people with disabilities. Hopefully that's being worked on. We think that NHTSA working with the US Access Board is the way to go.
Thanks, Carol. And Ken. Would any of the other panelists like to speak on this issue? Okay, at this point, we don't have any other questions in the queue. So we are a bit shy, under an hour. If any of the panelists would like to give, feel that they haven't said everything that they'd like to say, I'd like to offer this opportunity. I see that Marco raised his hand, so I'll turn to Marco first.
Yeah, I would just want to speak to one word that was used earlier in one of the questions, the term accident. I think it really highlights an opportunity for us at this moment. So we know that when someone crashes in a car, it is not an accident, right? An accident implies that it was a lightning that struck, or there was oil on the road that you slipped, and that there was no human kind of error involved, right? We don't call a plane that crashes for a plane accident. We call it a plane crash. And as a consequence of that language, in part, we have rigorous investigations into a plane crash to determine what happened, what kind of technical malfunction or error on the part of the pilot or someone else. But it's rigorous investigations, right? And so the language really matters, that it's a crash, not an accident. I think we are at this moment where, in some ways, the automated vehicles are almost identical to contemporary vehicles. But in other ways, it's something completely new and different. And I think we have an opportunity now, when we're looking at culpability, right, liabilities, particularly for auto manufacturers, and this new regulatory environment, to really look at these crashes as preventable and as having a root cause. Whether it's the design of the car, the design of the built environment as well, but in this instance, but of course, the build and the design of the car. And so we have an opportunity to really impose that kind of rigorous, and require that similar type of rigorous analysis post-crash, coupled with liability, manufacturer liability, to really kind of get beyond where we are now of seeing most crashes as mere accidents.
Marco, thank you for those comments. I'd like to just dovetail on what you just said, because some of you may have seen over the weekend that 2020 did a special on the Boeing Max. And I think that there are a number of comparisons to be made between what has happened with that tragedy and what we're trying to avoid with autonomous vehicles. For example, there was a lack of FAA oversight. There was a lack of pilot training on the new MCAS system, well, new at the time, and that the systems that could have assisted the pilots in those two crashes were not standard equipment. There were extra charges and not required to be part of the new system. Additionally, when you're thinking about plane crashes versus airline crashes, obviously the roadway environment is much more populated, and a driver of a vehicle, especially, if we're talking about systems that are partially automated, which are known as levels 2 and levels 3, the driver needs to be able to respond to what is happening in the roadway environment much more quickly than usually a pilot would have to. So I think it's really important that we take heed to the lessons learned from those two crashes when we're thinking about autonomous vehicles, to try to avoid similar situations. I'd like to, again, open up to the other panelists. We have a few other minutes if anyone would like to add some final comments.
Cathy, this is Dara Baldwin. And I just wanted to add to what Ken discussed around vision and the testing and being scientists and having things being measured or even implemented from Europe to the United States. And I just want to implore that we not do that. and that we stop doing that. Number one reason is that Europe does not have the history of slavery and oppression that this country has. And every time people take policies and programs from Europe and try to implement them into the United States, we have issues and concerns because they leave out our community and what I was discussing about equity. So yes, we want to have the research, as Carol said about NHTSA doing it, but we as the United States need to implement and be innovative in our own ways in which we measure these things. And can you set it in your comments about not recognizing dark people and people of color? Most European countries are homogeneously white. And so when we take those processes and those indicators and bring them to the United States, that is where we have issues and concerns. And so I just want to make sure we put that out there and make sure legislators and NHTSA and everyone else who does this work, we need to create our own and be innovative about the United States and our history and what is going on here when we create these programs.
Thanks, Dara. That's an invaluable perspective. I really appreciate you speaking up.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point too. And we need to make sure that our tests reflect America and all of the issues that we have and the built environments we have and the different problems that people face in America that might not face in other places like Europe. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Cathy, if I may.
Please.
I think one of the things that's really significant to remember is that this diverse group of folks are not afraid of new technology. Many of us have fought hard for safety technology, and in fact, we have fought against the car makers many times to incorporate safety technology. This isn't about being afraid of new technology. It's about making sure that this technology is going to work for all consumers, all pedestrians, all bicyclists. And if we don't step up and work hard to make sure it works, the fact of dangerous accidents and problems with autonomous vehicles could actually prevent the implementation of potentially life-saving technology. So it's not about being afraid of the future. It's just making sure that the future is as safe as it can be.
Thanks, Jack. Before we leave, would any other panelists would like to make some concluding remarks?
Briefly, yes. I would just say to piggyback on what Jack said, there's tremendous opportunity in the future here, and that goes for Congress as well. Congress can and must do far better for all Americans when it comes to AVs than it has done in the recent past, especially since this kind of a comprehensive AV bill would bring the most significant changes to our auto safety laws in decades, and really our transportation laws. Federal legislation should include strong safety measures that would truly protect consumers, regardless of whether a human or software is doing the driving. Fundamentally, members of Congress, as policy leaders and representatives of the public, they need to show their constituents and people across the country that protecting them is their top priority. The best way to accomplish this is to focus right now on, of course, our country's response to the coronavirus pandemic and the health and economic security of all Americans, and also to work separately for a strong safety-first bill to promote road safety as automated vehicles are developed, tested, and deployed.
Thanks, Will. I think that's a great note for us to conclude on. Again, the information that we discussed today will be on our advocates website, which is saferoads.org. And again, a list of all of the panelists and their contact information will be there. So if anyone who is watching has any follow-up questions, we are more than glad to try to answer them. And thank you again to our wonderful panel today. And thank you for all of you who tuned in to listen to us. Have a great afternoon.